Bookworms, my name is Kaylin and welcome back to my channel Thriving in Fiction. Today I'm going to be doing my review for the First Law Trilogy. When I say review, I mean it might be more like just a gush fest. Because when I say I loved this trilogy, I mean this might be one of my new favorite trilogies of all time. Where do I start? I'm going to start where I think everyone agrees Joe Abercrombie's writing truly shines, and that's going to be his character work. Everything in this story is built around the characters. The world is there for the characters to experience. The plot is there for some reason for you to be with the characters. The characters is why the First Law Trilogy exists. These characters are so real. They leap off the page. You know exactly which point of view character you're sitting with the moment you read the first sentence. Joe Abercrombie's writing is a masterclass in putting your reader exactly where your character is. This trilogy exists for you to experience these characters. And it's really hard to talk about anything in these books without feeling like you're giving something away, without feeling like you're spoiling it, because it is so character driven that even telling you about these characters feels like a spoiler, because it's such a rich experience to just sit down and have this narrative and these characters unfold before you. So I'm going to try to toe that line of not giving too much away while trying to tell you what it is I loved about reading these books. So within this series, you're following three main point of view characters, and their stories are centered on or linked with the story of a country called the Union, or an empire called the Union. So you're following Glocha, who is a former champion, a military hero of the Union, who was captured by the Gurkish, who is the main enemy or the main opposing force of the Union. So he was captured by them and tortured. So he is a ruined former hero. And so he takes what he experienced in the dungeons of the Gurkish and he turns around and starts torturing in the name of the king of the Union. And he is a ruined shell of what he formerly was. He is in constant pain. He's missing the toes on his left foot. He has all of these missing teeth. He can't eat anything that has any taste to it. His eye is leaking tears constantly. And because he has this history and has this experience, he is absolutely fearless, and that makes him absolutely terrifying. He is one of the most well-written characters I think I've come across so far in my fantasy experience. He is and does horrendous things, but he is written in such a way that you like him and you root for him, and then you think, am I a bad person because I'm rooting for this human who is doing these awful things? But he's written in such a way where you understand him, you're in his shoes, you understand his thought process, you have his thoughts written in italics, so you understand the contrast between his inner monologue and how he presents himself to the world outside, and it's just a masterclass in character work. And his arc across the entire series, across all three books, oh my god, I loved it so much. Watching him navigate the political landscape of this absolutely brutal world and seeing the political machinations that he dances around, it's amazing. And I loved where his character ended up at the end, whether he deserved it or not. And given the horrendous things that this character does, the fact that I'm rooting for him it says so much about the skill of Abercrombie in writing his characters. You're also following Gisele Dan Luther, who is a vain, lazy, narcissistic piece of shit, really. And when the first book opens up, he is training to compete in a swordsman competition, and where this character starts, this vain, narcissistic, egotistical, piece of shit character, where he starts, and then what he goes through all through the second book, and then where he ends up in the third is just, I never would have imagined his ultimate arc. The entire time I was reading the first and second books, I was wondering why he was a part of it. Why are you here? He didn't know why he was here. He didn't know why he was a part of it, especially in the second book, which I found hilarious. They're, it's almost a road trip book, and he has no idea why he's a part of it. I didn't know why he was a part of it, but I loved watching him interact with all of these characters along the way and watching him grow and try to be a better person and then stumble back and then try to be a better person again and then stumble back. And looking back at where he started in the first book, it's just, oh my god, it's so good. It's written so well. Because people don't change overnight, and they don't change just like that even when they know they're an awful human being. It still takes time. It still takes stumbles. So to watch him stumble and try to figure it out, and ultimately knowing where he ends up, it was very realistic. And then the third main perspective of the book is Logan Ninefingers, who is a Northman, and the Northerners are an even more brutal and tough society than the brutal and tough world of the Union. And he is a named man with a reputation as big and filthy as you can imagine. And when you first meet him, and almost all through the second book, you're wondering why he has this reputation that he has. He seems like a big old teddy bear. He is trying to make friends and trying to put his past behind him, trying to move on, trying to be a better man. That is a really big theme in this. All you can do is try to be better. You can't change the past. All you can do is try to be better here and now and in the future. And then it shows these characters absolutely failing at it at every turn, which I think is very realistic. So with this narrative being so character-driven and character-focused, the plot is more there for them to experience and get swept up in rather than them moving and pushing the plot forward. It's more things are happening to them. They're existing in this world, and things are happening in this world, so these things are happening to them. And ultimately knowing where things go and how they pay off, I'm sure I could go back and reread and notice a whole bunch of other things that I didn't notice on my first read, which is one of the things I love the most about reading, is knowing where it ends up and then going back and reading all of the subtle and clever foreshadowing that actually laid the groundwork for why it ended up the way it ended up. So the plot is definitely non-existent. I don't want to come across as saying like there's no plot, it's all just character driven. The plot is definitely there, but it definitely takes a backseat to the characters. And I would say the same thing about the magic within this world. It's not a hard magic system like a Brandon Sanderson magic system where there are definite rules and it's almost like a science. This is very soft and more in the background. Like when the magic is needed, it kind of comes forward, but it takes a back seat to the characters and the world itself. It's definitely a part of it. It's definitely present and there, and definitely more so as you go through each book consecutively, but the main focus is always going to be the characters, which in turn leads me to the world building. The world building was definitely, it was as present as it needed to be. You experience the world through these characters, so it was definitely present. It was as present as it needed to be, and it was as each character experienced the world. There was nothing beyond that. So when you're sitting with each of these individual characters, that's the tunnel through which you're seeing, or the filter through which you're seeing this world. And almost like the plot, the world building is there as much as it needed to be to set the world, to set the tone, but it was more a tool for you to experience the characters. Abercrombie does none of these things badly, really. It's more, everything is solid, everything can stand by its own, but because everything is so solid and then the character work is just so beyond anything I've ever written, it's almost like it elevates every other element of the story up a level. And definitely within the second book, Before They Are Hanged, you feel the scope of the world in that one, because it's almost like a road trip book. And this helps you feel the breadth and the depth of the world. And traveling is hard and it's dangerous, and it really helped expand the world while keeping it grounded. And you always got the sense of this is what you're experiencing, but little lines would be sprinkled in that would help you contextualize that, yes, this is what you're experiencing, the Union is here, this is how big it is, but there's all this big expanded world out here that we're not even touching on. And one thing I think that lends itself to this is the fact that there's no map. I am one of those people who, in order to situate myself within a fantasy world, I will constantly be referring back to the map. But because this didn't have one, it almost lent itself to this mystery and mystique and let me sink into the actual atmosphere of the setting that he was creating rather than worrying about where I physically or geographically was at the time. Now let's talk about Abercrombie's prose. The best way I can describe his prose is it's very thoughtful. It's not overly flowery or over the top. There's no ridiculously flowery purple metaphors or anything like that. It's very intentional and thoughtful, but grounded and real. And one thing I thought exemplified that the most was the dialogue and the cadence with which the Northerners spoke. I absolutely loved the dialect and the cadence and the turns of phrases that the Northerners used. It was absolutely amazing. It was a case study in how language and culture really are one and the same. One influences the other so much that you can't separate the two. Northerners are gruff and they're dirty, but they're quick and clever because they have to be. Their world and their culture is so brutal that the very strong and the very clever are the ones who rise to the top, and their language reflects that. It's so colorful and gruff and just grounded. All an arsehole knows about is shit. And as dark and as violent as these books are, I found them to be anyway, my poor little soul did, the violence never came across as cheap. You always felt the cost of the violence that was happening. The characters, battle-hardened characters are terrified every time they have to go into battle. It's one of the things I loved about the Dogman's perspective so much, is every time he had to go into a battle, he had to piss. The violence is never romanticized. You feel every hit. And while sometimes afterwards they recovered maybe a little bit too quickly, or you didn't feel the consequences after the battle, I always felt very jittery when reading the battle scenes. Like Logan, for all his hard and brutal reputation, is scared shitless every time he has to go into a battle. But it's definitely not for everybody. If you were a plot-driven reader, this is definitely not a story for you. If you really, really are into world building and nothing else, I don't think this would be the one for you. And while I do appreciate the characters and the world building, and there's no element of this story that is lacking, I do feel it's more than the sum of its parts. All of it together, Abercrombie's prose, the political machinations, the characters, Glocha, Logan, Gisele, even Dogman. I've never had secondary characters stick with me so much after I've put down the book. So I absolutely loved it. I don't know if you could tell, but I absolutely loved my time in this world, which is so strange to say considering how much blood was involved in reading these pages. But it's one of my favorite fantasy series so far. Abercrombie has shot to the top of my favorite authors lists. I have no doubt I will be reading more of his books this year. Definitely not perfect. I kind of wish there was more plot, but ultimately I was very happy with where the characters ended up. I found it made sense for the world and the atmosphere that was being built across these 3 books. It definitely made sense with where each of the characters ended up. It wasn't a happy, fluffy ending. Definitely my favorite read of the year so far. If you pick up anything because I recommend it, please pick up The Blade itself. Just give it a try. And then, if it's not for you, it's not for you. I understand it's not for everyone, but it worked so, so well for me. One of my favorite reads of the year so far. Alright guys, so that has been my review for the First Law Trilogy by Joe Abercrombie. Let me know in the comments below if you've read it. Did you like it? Did you hate it? Please don't break my little heart and tell me you hated it. Like and subscribe if you haven't already, guys, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye.